I'm Nil Durak. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Head of Customer Success for Solvoyo. We are a next-generation platform that helps clients manage their supply chains end-to-end, from demand all the way to delivery, with little to no human intervention. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about an exciting topic, fresh supply chains. Why fresh supply chains? Well, because they're a tough nut to crack. And when you're thinking about a supply chain problem with multi-objectives, right? You have availability against service. And then there's the waste element. And then multi-constraints, your seasonality, weather, and now pricing, inflation. There is a very complex problem that professionals have to solve. As a result, we actually compiled a very distinguished group of panelists, not only talk about what these specific challenges are, but hope to really help you walk away with some practical recommendations. So I'm really honored to be joined by three professionals here today. Let me just quickly introduce you one by one. Brittain Ladd, if there is a celebrity in supply chain, that's him. With 30,000+ followers on LinkedIn alone, he's a true voice of the supply chain industry, not just because of all the experience he had as a consultant and also a professional, but also this incredible research that he does to allow everyone to see what's emerging and trendsetting. Joining us also a supply chain professional, Mike Balint, who has been managing fresh supply chains for the largest retailer in the world. For those of you who are coming in to join us from different parts of the universe, Walmart is a $6 billion company. Mike has seen it all. And now, last but not least, is a professional, Asena Denizeri, our own member of our leadership team from Solvoyo, who has actually seen retail supply chains as well as supply chains from a technology perspective, again, for 2 decades. So together, we are probably covering almost 100 years of experience. So thank you so much for joining us. What I want to do is to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're facing. It is really an existential crisis, right? When you're looking at the demand soaring for fresh produce, right? Because of the perceived healthcare benefits. But on the other hand, there is a major issue with the supply. You call it the effect of climate change. There's also, a lot of issues surrounding the waste, sustainability. So when we look at this perfect storm, Brittain, what is really an ideal supply chain? What does the ideal supply chain really look like? What would you say?
In my opinion, and I've done a ton of researches on this globally, the thing that I always say to people is, number one, let's answer the question, what's the purpose of a supply chain? And really the purpose of a supply chain is to do one thing, enable growth. However, as part of that, really what supply chains should be are lean. And the reasons why supply chains should be lean is that by their very nature, lean supply chains are green supply chains. So what do I really mean by that? That means invest the time, money, and effort to really understand, so what type of a supply chain do we need as a company? What type of logistics infrastructure do we need as a company? What do we really need in terms of a platform and so forth for us to meet customer demand? And so the thing that I say to companies is that you must apply science to your supply chain. And then science must really help you drive your supply chain, monitor your supply chain, measure your supply chain on a continuous basis. So at a high level, that's really what I say to individuals in this industry.
Well, you really touched upon both on the growth side, but as well as the cost side, right? So the ideal supply chain not only manages to grow, but has to really manage costs at the same time, but not at the expense of each other, right? Has to be done concurrently. So when you kind of look at this kind of a universe, Mike, as a professional in this industry, right? What would you kind of make this a reality as a professional, and tell us some of the things that you really struggled as a professional, and maybe some of the best practices that you can also touch upon, especially in managing perishables.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the challenge of enabling growth and maintaining lean operations like that's at the heart of every supply chain professional. It's extraordinarily difficult to manage both of those, but you have to, right? The supply chain needs to be in a position where it is supporting the customer for growth. I think the opportunity for the supply chains in today's world, where there is a lot of uncertainty, where there's a lot of complexity, where you have a lot of unknowns, the ability to have the right mechanisms in place, whether that's technology or process or it's people, but be able to have the right mechanisms in place to be able to respond and adapt and overcome those particular situations. On the fresh supply chain, that's something that we see all the time, and so weather becomes one of those like really key places of one of those key impacts. We know about it, but we can't necessarily predict the severity or the duration of the particular activity. And geographically, the weather events are different. You could have fires, you could have your hurricanes, you could have excess precipitation, you could have a drought. There's a lot of different pieces that need to be managed. When I look at some of the things that I've seen to make supply chain successful, as you're working to have lean operations, as you're trying to enable growth, but you're also managing a lot of these uncertainty, there are a couple key pieces that I think really are important. Number one is risk management. And so I think the ability to sit down and understand, here's what we could face, what things do we have in play that allow us to be able to manage through those and overcome. The second piece is, especially on the fresh supply chain, to be able to have diversified sourcing that can allow you to align suppliers to a particular area, but you be able to diversify that so that you don't have immediate impacts from one particular area to another. The other key piece, I think, is collaboration, and this is where I think technology comes in huge. Is not only collaboration with the suppliers, but also internal collaboration with key partners. The more that you can see what's happening in near time or real time, the better chances you have of being able to respond effectively to that particular situation.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, right, Mike? I mean, when you look at all these kind of like balls that a supply chain leader has to really juggle, when you look at sort of the initial applications of how technology deals with the uncertainty that you just touched upon, maybe we just allow Asena to talk about some of the examples of what she sees some of our grocery retail clients are grappling with. And I want to really address the bigger issue of sustainability. So Asena, why don't you, say a few words, please?
Thank you, Nil. Yes, so as you refer to what's required, to make these lean supply chains happen, definitely technology is part of it. And the technology is here. Actually, it's been here probably for the last decade, based on our experiences with our customers too, from use of machine learning technology, creation of digital twins to help assess those risk situations and scenario planning, with very sophisticated demand planning capabilities, especially in the context of fresh and seasonal items. There's a lot of complexities there, obviously. And creating end-to-end integrated platform that's scalable and, as you mentioned, kind of extends beyond the four walls of the organization and enables collaboration. So with the advancement of cloud-based technologies, now the world has really shrunk, down to a browser. You can literally link hundreds of companies together, give them visibility, give them access, and give them an opportunity to kind of make faster decisions in a more agile manner. Now within seconds, you don't have to wait for reports, to be transferred, email, back and forth, phone calls. So definitely across the various types of retailers that we've been working on, we've implemented different versions of these technologies, but ultimately, being lean really requires an integrated single source of truth and be able to make decisions faster, which means you have to rely on automation too. When you're relying on multitudes of people having to analyze data, make sense of it, make decision, it really slows things down. And the technology is here to empower people to make faster decisions through these leveraging advanced analytics, optimization technology, AI, machine learning, and all the cloud technologies that are here to serve the supply chain professionals.
I have a question, a high-level question for Brittain. So, Brittain, when we look at the US alone, right, apparently we're wasting food that is covering 1,000 pyramids, Egyptian pyramids worth of food every single year in North America alone. So when you look at the, what is it, almost up to 40% of the globally produced food being wasted, part of it at the production, about 13% is being wasted at the production level. 6% is wasted at the initial storage and handling, and another 6% being wasted at the distribution level. And then 8% is being wasted at homes. If you check my fridge right now, God knows how many completely bad milk sitting in there. So when you look at this, what is it that we need to do from a sustainability perspective, and what are some of the trends that you see, in the industry that not only deals with the growth aspect of supply chain, right, but also really more like social responsibility aspects of supply chain?
Well, really, the trend that I'm seeing, I began to notice it about 5 and 6 years ago when I had been doing some work in India and working with agriculture organizations over there, farmers over there, because so much of their product was rotting in the field. And the thing that I've discovered is that there's more of an attention to detail now. There's more of an awareness of the need for transparency and visibility across the supply chain. But really, the main thing is understanding the concept of backwards planning. Basically, shelf backwards, field backwards, from the field to the fork. And that's just simply putting in much better project management. That's putting in more controls in place to where people are understanding we really have to look very broadly across agriculture to identify all these things that are going wrong. What technology can we use? What better management can we use to solve it? But in a lot of countries globally, they simply don't have the infrastructure yet. In the places I travel to throughout India and Asia, for example, in many of those countries, they have no cold chain facilities, nothing. The product, if it's ready to be harvested, they can only harvest what they have available, what equipment they can use. And if they don't get it done, it just absolutely sits there and rots. Well, now what India is doing is saying we have to really invest in this. So India is going to be investing about $150 billion over the next 5 years on a lot of things related to infrastructure. Part of that's going to be agriculture. So this is not something we're going to solve overnight, but it is something that can be solved. And we know it can be solved because in the US, we have really, industry-leading agriculture practices. Brazil has industry-leading agriculture practices. And so a lot of this stuff is just simply going to be transferred to China, India, and other regions of the world. And then, of course, through the technology platforms that are available, much better supply chain platforms, much better understanding of how to really manage everything involved in the harvesting process. Yep. So that's really what I'm expecting to happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you look at now, Mike, when you kind of like bring it down to a micro level, right? There's this consumer need for freshness, right? And then the supply chains have to really kind of like manage the need for freshness against availability and also cost. So can you walk us through like what are some of the things that you have seen as a practitioner dealing with the whole freshness issue? Because then it is directly linked to how you manage waste.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The pressure of availability on supply chains can cause some decisions with unintended consequences. Waste being one of those. Asena and Brittain both talked about, end-to-end thinking, end-to-end visibility, and in the fresh supply chain, I believe that's absolutely paramount. I love the backwards planning that Brittain just talked about, because it is something where the work that I undertook previously in my career, we started with what does the end consumer want when it's in terms of how long strawberries, as an example, will stay in their refrigerator. And we be able to come back with an answer to say 6 days. And then you say, okay, well, how many days does the strawberry actually have before it's smoothie ready? And it's one of those things where it's like, well, it could be 10, 12, or 14 days, and there's variability there. Well, if a customer wants 6 days and you only have 12, that tells you what the supply chain has to do in the time that it needs to do that. And not everything is around the corner from the field. So I think some of the key things that we encountered as we went through this was, number one, getting the organization to think end to end. That was a massive change management piece of work, because not everybody won. Right, there were puts and takes that happened throughout the design as we implemented a solution that ultimately was aimed at reducing food waste, but I couldn't sacrifice availability. I couldn't grow inventory. I had to reduce time, right? So you have all of these different things that seem competing, but in the end, what your leadership wants is they want to see that top line growth, as we talked about earlier. They want to see a minimal or no impact on your bottom line. And the customer needs to see fresher product at the same rate of availability. End-to-end thinking became really critical. The second was to really look at the supply chain and say, what are some of the self-imposed constraints that we have that we need to rethink? And where we found the supply chain to be very rigid, to be really locked in, we really had to understand whether or not we could, through technology, through data, through process, be able to unlock that constraint, be able to remove it. That was another key piece for us. The third was really working with the growers, the farmers, the suppliers, to make sure that we were integrating effectively with them. That was another key piece. And Brittain, you touched on this a little bit yourself. This would not be a field to fork solution if we didn't work with them. I found myself in the strawberry fields, not to try to get all Beatles on us here, but yeah, to be in the strawberry fields, eating strawberries, eating mustard greens, whatever, and really working with them to understand, hey, what are you up against that I don't have any visibility to, that I need to appreciate? And as we unraveled that, we understood where technology could solve, where data was incredibly important, where ongoing collaboration was critical as well. The end result for us was fantastic. It was one that exceeded even my expectations of what we were able to do. It was counterintuitive. The design was counterintuitive, but in the end, that's what we needed.
Now, this is why change management is so critical. It's not just applying the best technology, but how do you really marry that with the process change and much more continuous improvement mindset. So we'll come to that too. Let me just ask Asena, what is the strawberry fields beetle moment for the technology then? Because when you take the strawberries as an example, right? How do we plan for all the complexities that Mike is describing to manage availability, manage working capital, i.e. inventory, and also manage waste?
Yes, so definitely devil is in the detail here, and the detail is so complex, it is not really humanly possible to manage this. So now we're looking at using advanced models like optimization models that can address whatever your goal is, right? A certain service level target that you want to achieve. subject to all of the constraints and the costs associated with it, and give you a kind of more holistic point of view in your total cost to serve. So when your strawberry category manager insists that you're going to be in 99.5% available, right, not to disappoint the strawberry customers, they can now understand what's the cost associated with it, right? So much is going to go to waste. I'm going to incur waste because of this. I have to, invest in additional refrigerated storage. I need to make more frequent deliveries, right, in order to meet the fresh expectation as well, since, they only have 6 days to go. I need to be replenishing them more frequently. So when you're trying to make these decisions, like how much inventory I need to have in the store, how much do I need to ship, how frequently I have to ship, when all of these decisions are being made in silo, you're not going to achieve that total goal for the company, which is ultimately the bottom line, right? We don't want to, well, of course, we want to be proud of serving our customers with strawberries, but we can't just do it at the cost of losing money to make the strawberry customers happy. So with optimization models, you can actually get to that answer, like what is, given the realities, given all of the operational realities, given all the logistics implications, given the customer expectations, to understand the trade-offs so you can actually make informed decisions instead of just going with a single KPI, such as availability being the goal, looking at it more from a more holistic point of view and understanding, well, if I try to attain this is the cost. If I try this other scenario, this is the cost. So which one are we going to, which is the best model for our company? And as I said in the beginning, doing that type of analysis in Excel spreadsheets is not really feasible. So that's why technology needs to step in and the silos need to be broken, because this is not a single person's problem. As you suggested, Mike, there's so many different dimensions and aspects to it, and all of those dimensions need to come together in a single model and in a single source of truth.
Mm-hmm. Asena, very quickly, can you also touch upon the demand aspect of this? Of course, managing fresh, you really need to understand the demand and sense it so that it can actually be a quality input into the rest of the decisions that you make, inventory decisions,
Yes,
fulfillment decisions, transportation decisions. So tell us, what's going on the demand planning side, because then I have a great segue into what Brittain, talks a lot about in the AI area as a follow-up question. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll let Brittain talk to the AI aspect. But ultimately, especially with these seasonal products, there are so many different drivers that shape this demand, right? We're talking about season shifting. We're talking about extreme temperatures, weather events, harvest season, harvest weeks, days could be shifting. So to model the demand for these periodic or seasonal items, you need to really have very sophisticated demand forecasting models that take into account all these different internal and external drivers. Being able to model the life cycle of, strawberries. How does it ramp up? Because in the beginning of the season, they're more expensive. Therefore, fewer people are buying them. And then there's like the peak where they become more available. You get harvests from all around the country. So you have all this supply, so the prices go down. And then there's the tail end of it, when maybe strawberries are not looking that good anymore. And maybe you might even have to reduce prices not to end up with waste. So being able to apply more sophisticated models that attract all of these different drivers in one model, all the way to as I said, the temperature. And maybe one of the things that we've experienced this summer, of course, very extreme heat, inspiring people maybe to have more strawberry milkshakes. Therefore, joke aside, definitely weather plays a role both on the demand and on the supply side. And then the demand curve in these cases are shaped by supply, because the supply really drives the pricing too, right? When there's little of it, the prices are high, so that has an impact on demand. When there's more, their prices get lower, so that also has another impact on demand. So the demand model is fundamentally, where you start to get this right. And of course, to be able to do this intelligently, you need to use a lot of data, and you also have to think very local, because as Mike suggested, the sources are different, and maybe some stores are literally across the corner from some strawberry fields. I live in Florida, and there are definitely a lot of strawberry fields there. And then some stores, maybe up north, they're not that close to the strawberry fields, and their demand might be different, their expectations might be different. So you really need to get down to the local, literally store, zip code, city level, to be able to understand both the supply, access to supply, and how the demand preferences are shifting throughout its life cycle.
Excellent. Okay. Oops. I think we lost Brittain here. Guys, I think, we are at the mercy of Mercury. So those of you who follow astrology, Mercury is in retro. So we started as 4. Now we're going to continue as 3. There is a lot going on in the US with the hurricanes. So panel, we're okay to continue, right?
Yes, no hurricane here right now. So at least for the next couple of minutes, I think I'm safe.
Okay. So Mike, let's talk about your experience utilizing technology. Of course, advent of advanced analytics, very promising, including AI. Can you walk us through some of the successful examples of you seeing, that being applied? But then also speak to us like what you wished there was there that didn't exist, that technology addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really one of the first areas that I see, where I've seen it applied for significant success is really around cognitive automation, and that's one where the algorithms are able to take a lot of data, whether it's structured or unstructured, and be able to perform a task. It's not necessarily a routine task, but it's kind of the other end of the spectrum of RPA, the robotic process automation. And so I think the area for me in terms of cognitive automation that I think is really exciting is the fact that the type of problem solving that it can do and how quickly it can do it is extraordinarily important for a supply chain to become flexible and to become agile. And as Asena talked about, some of the scenario modeling, and that's one of those ones I wish I had. I wish, going back, I could have used scenario modeling, what if modeling. That would have been just an absolute game changer to be able to say, I'm about to make this decision. It feels right. It looks right. I think it's going to cost the right thing, but I really don't know. And I've got to be able to do some sort of test. Scenario modeling, what if modeling, that would have been an absolute game changer. I think, you're continuing to see, extreme advances on the forecasting side, where for sales forecasting, where you're able to see multi-algorithm approaches to forecasting. Asena talked a little bit about that. The other area that I wish that I would have had would have been more demand sensing capabilities. Understanding those short-term changes in customer behavior, in trends. Those would have been absolute wins for a supply chain. Again, going back to how do you get a supply chain to be flexible and agile, to be able to respond quickly to those changes? And I think, that's also, I think, a movement towards a customer-centric supply chain, which, Gartner's written a lot of articles about that as well as others. And I think that demand sensing capability is one I wish I would have had when I was doing some of this fresh work. The other areas where I've seen some great advancements is really around the quality, food quality, when you're looking at food safety. So as the product's coming in and being inspected, seeing some great advancements there in terms of moving from visual inspection to destruction, but now being able to leverage machine learning to look for patterns, and be able to understand very quickly what you have in front of you.
Mhm. No, that's really helpful. I mean, we covered a lot about the distribution industry, right? Mike coming from distribution industry, talking about the challenges and some of the successful applications of technology. But there is also a very important player here, which is providing all the input into the distribution industry, which is the manufacturers. So, Asena, when you look at CPG manufacturers who are not only dealing with perishable products from dairy to seafood to bakery, and also managing significant cold chains, right? Like, our client Unilever managing ice cream business. Like, what do you really see are absolutely critical to for success managing fresh supply chains for the professionals?
Yes, so definitely starting with proximity to the end customer, right? Mike mentioned that coming from the customer point of view and getting a demand signal, demand sensing. So one of the things that they're doing right now is collaborating with their sales channels, retail chains, and getting their point of sale data to use in demand sensing so they can see those signals literally real time as fast as the retailers can see it, and therefore can adjust their plans, their production plans, their capacity plans, their allocation, fulfillment, transportation plans accordingly. They're also now doing more sophisticated capacity planning, resource planning, production planning, line scheduling in a synchronized manner. So although especially in the case of ice cream, the demand is really peaking in a few months, like 50% of the ice cream is sold, I think, in like 2 or 3 months. They have to build up to that. But in order to do that, you really have to plan at a very detailed level, starting with your schedules, how many people they're going to work, how many lines they're going to use, and build literally the whole year's production plan for the bread and butter items, the top sellers, so that they have in season the flexibility to react to those changes in trends, changes due to new product introduction, because God knows every year you see different flavors of ice cream, right? The new products, they have to put it in front of the customer, and they're not going to know exactly how many they need until the customer starts tasting and then see if they like it, love it, they don't like it. So being able to really build up the core products months ahead, and then free up capacity to be more agile during the season. So that in itself, is a major, I think, game-changing capability. And to be able to use technology in such an integrated fashion, and starting from demand to inventory to capacity, line scheduling, and kind of going through that loop literally, every day, every week, across thousands of SKUs, definitely requires, I think, more power than human brains can provide. So that's where one place also. And the other one is getting really smarter about fulfillment and transportation planning, and planning those simultaneously. Traditionally, those were literally separate organizations, customer service basically deciding how to allocate inventory against the sales orders coming from retailers, and then the logistics taking care of the whole trucking side of it, or just transportation in general. But now merging those again to be more focused on the overall supply chain, lean management, as well as total cost to serve, so that there is a synchronized planning that addresses all the opportunities and efficiencies by solving these problems simultaneously, which by itself again is an optimization problem. So those types of capabilities we see emerging with the CPG companies, and then ultimately kind of closing that loop with the retailers, doing more collaboration, being able to collaborate on the events, promotional events that are coming up, being able to collaborate on supply crisis or disasters or disruptions, and being able to come up with different strategies. And doing it at a fairly local level, again, makes it even more fun. And overall, the bottom line is CPG is not falling behind. They are also taking advantage of these advanced technologies and synchronized planning capabilities.
Well, that's wonderful segue, Mike, because I know that as a distribution leader, you have to worry about the increasing fuel costs, right? And making sure that your flow operation, and in the case of CPGs is of course fulfillment, but making sure that your flow operation consider not only freshness, but also transportation cost in making these decisions upfront in those fulfillment side, so that those decisions are not made in a silo. To Asena's point, right? It's not just the customer priority that goes into the decision, when you're basically fulfilling an order, because there's a lot of constraints in there, right? The customer priority, customer importance, but then incorporating a very important aspect, which is managing transportation cost into the mix, while also maintaining freshness, is something that I know that as a distribution overall supply chain, end-to-end supply chain leader, you're really worried about on the distribution side. Do you want to just add a few points about that aspect of fresh supply chain, Mike, before we go into our last question, which is the practical takeaways?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, from a transportation perspective, in the end-to-end work that I've done, having the transportation leaders a part of the process was absolutely critical. It seems like a no-brainer, but there are multiple functions that you want to be able to have, whether that's the transportation strategy, or it is the brokerage side, or if you have an internal fleet, being able to have all of them at the table. Because in the end, you're dealing with scarce resources. You only have so many drivers. You only have so many team drivers. You only have so many trailers. So that scarcity of resources has to be utilized effectively. And of course, transportation has a ton of metrics that helps them understand their utilization, whether that's a cost per mile, cube per mile. From a fresh perspective, the biggest thing that we were working on was the allocation of team drivers, because the one thing we knew team drivers could do for us is keep the product moving. Because anytime that a fresh product stops in the supply chain, you are taking shelf life away from your customer. Mm-hmm. That's the short of it. And so that was the same kind of principle that we used across the board, whether that was inventory strategies, whether it was labor schedules, whatever it might be. We looked at where does a case stop? Where does it dwell? How long does it dwell, and why? And going back to some of my earlier comments about self-imposed constraints, transportation optimization is critical. So not only the use of the assets and resources that you have, but also just, from a routing perspective, the advancements in algorithms to be able to drive massively efficient routes for both inbound and outbound freight. Those have been game changers. The amount of constraints that these algorithms can consume and be able to plan against, to be able to route against, absolute game changer for distribution.
Oh, absolutely. It is another very complex area of the supply chain, which is being overlooked most of the time because it's the end of the line, right? And being ignored and overlooked, but it's where the rubber meets the road, because that's where the delivery to the ultimate customer takes place. So, your comments are absolutely valuable, and the advancement of technology in that area, however unsexy as it sounds, are quite advanced. So I'm glad that you touch upon that, Mike. Now, when you look at kind of your experience as a professional over the last 2 decades, right? And just to make our audience's time worthwhile, what would be some of the practical takeaways that they can go back and at least ponder about? And same question to you, Asena.
Yeah, I think there's a couple key takeaways. Earlier in this conversation, we were talking about field to fork, end to end. Understanding that customer side is incredibly important. It is absolutely easy to look at, for fresh produce, when it was harvested. You can get that information, and to be able to be at that point of sale to your customer and understand how fresh the product is, it's a very real moment that you're faced with numbers that just probably don't make sense. Um, and you've got to make sense of. And that becomes the fun part, the challenging part of the fresh supply chain, and where data and technology process and this end-to-end focus can really drive a lot of changes. So I think first is understand where you're at. So really a current state in terms of how fresh are you delivering. If you're like me, it's one thing to look for the best buy date, but then after you pull that packaged salad, off the shelf, then you start inspecting it, right? You start looking at every leaf of lettuce in there to understand the quality, and you may put it back. And so I think just having a real piece there. I think the second is to understand other metrics that should be on the scorecard, other fresh metrics that should be there. A lot of times you have some sort of shrink number or waste number, but what I've found is that depending on your business, depending on your industry, there are other metrics that could really drive a different culture towards how you operate a fresh supply chain that could be significantly different than any other line of business you might have. The third piece is, as you think about supply chain and being responsive and agile to disruptions, making sure that you understand where you need to synchronize demand and supply. And then going back to some of Asena's comments, what are the problems, what are the situations that you want the demand side to be accountable for, and what is it that you want the supply side accountable for? And that's a fairly straightforward exercise. It doesn't require a lot of complexity, but you may say, listen, I want the demand side to manage seasonality, but on the supply side, you're going to manage the sourcing changes, and you're going to manage the everything that Mother Nature throws at you, because we want to manage it over there. And you may decide something very, very different. I think as you get clarity on that, then it starts to have clarity on roles, responsibility, process, and then what technology you need ultimately to be underpinning all of that to make it come to life. I think the other one, and I think a lot of retailers are doing this. I think a lot of growers and suppliers are doing this. But the last thing I would give you, I know I said last thing earlier, and it's my last thing. But a lot of times you hear, depending on what industry you come from, you've had first in, first out. You've had last in, first out. In fresh, it really is first expired, first out. And understanding how that comes to life in your supply chain. And is it giving you the results that you want? Because you could have a data gap, you could have an analytical gap, you may have a process gap. And so that's the other practical application I'd give you.
Oh, love it. This is why we bring the real people to webinars as opposed to talking heads like us. So thank you so much, Mike. And Asena, let's start from the last point that Mike made. I mean, there's the best before dates, but there's also net sales dates, right? How do you really, can you incorporate that into your takeaways? Because it's so critical to meet freshness expectations. You need to really track the batches and these dates very carefully, and it means different things, not just the shelf life, but there's a lot more complexity to shelf life. So can you talk about that, and then maybe some other takeaways?
Yeah, of course. So obviously there are so many arenas to tackle across the supply chain, but going back to your earlier point, Mike, kind of working your way back from the customer. What is the customer looking at? And does the expiration day really literally mean product is going to be sold until then? Or is the customer actually taking into account how much they're going to keep them in their fridge? They're actually counting back, and they're not buying something that's going to expire in 3 days because they know they're not going to consume it. So now technology, machine learning can be used to monitor those type of behavior and really get to the bottom of what is the real sellable, like you said, the net life or the sellable life of this product after it arrives, and be proactive when considering available to sell inventory instead of just going purely by the batch expiration date. Be able to kind of get to a more of smarter kind of customer point of view expiration date, manage inventory accordingly, because one of the things, as mentioned in the beginning, is there's still a lot going to waste at the stores too, right? We keep feeding all of this inventory to the stores and we keep throwing them away because the customer doesn't like it. Bananas, my favorite example is the organic bananas, that as soon as they start getting those brown dots on them, people don't want them unless they're going to bake banana bread. And if in the areas where there are not that many banana bread bakers, then those, bananas are going to waste. And being really more proactive in terms of understanding how much is at risk could also enable taking proactive actions, like maybe marking them down, a couple of days before those brown spots are all over them. So at least they're still being consumed, they're not being thrown away. So basically looking at, as you said, Mike, visibility is the key. First, understanding what's going on, what are people choosing, what are my constraints, what are my reasons. So starting with diagnostics, right? Just kind of keeping, okay, the KPIs are great to give overall guidance, but what makes really difference in terms of operational actions and initiatives are the diagnostics, understanding the reasons, understanding not at the overall company level, but at the local level, at the store level, at the distribution center or the cross-dock level, what's going on, getting that visibility. And to enable that, of course, you need data. All right. So put your data, if you're going to just do one thing at a time, which is a fairly smart approach, by the way, instead of trying to conquer the whole world in one project, kind of put a stake in the ground, start with diagnostics, put your data on a platform that's easily accessible, visible, digestible, and start learning and start applying diagnostics that will help you prioritize your next steps. Is it your own operational problems? Is it a supplier problem? Is it a transportation problem? All of those can easily become very apparent if you run the right diagnostics. Get to the root cause analysis, and then start investing your budget, your resources, your technology, infrastructure in the areas that are really going to make a difference, for you. And just when you're investing in platforms, make sure you invest in platforms that can do the synchronized planning, as we've discussed, kind of break down the silos, that are agile, that can evolve, because the world is changing every day. You don't want to invest, your time, your resources, your team's attention, change management efforts into technology that's going to be outdated. So make sure what you're getting or what you're building is agile enough that it can change, every month if you need to. So build Lego-like pieces, composable pieces that can be updated easily, that can be configured in different ways. My recommendation is, again, start small, learn from it, make your priorities based on actual data, and then pick your next target and move on in an agile manner.
Great. And the good news is you don't have to wait for your data to be clean. You can start anyway, right? Because technology allows data diagnostics for you to be able to kind of like fill in the gaps automatically, or identify areas where you have a real problem with data, so you can start fixing the data so that you can start utilizing them. So there is no perfect data status that you need achieve before you start. So that's also important to point out.
Exactly.
Right?
And you don't have to be a really huge company to do this. I think that now the technology is widely available and affordable for companies of all sizes. And as you said before, for many years, data really got in the way. But now, thanks to all the machine learning algorithms too, we can even fix the data problems and make new models, new assumptions, and dynamically update the data, and overall just help the company understand, what are the most critical data they need to address. Because when I say data, there are bazillion types of data, and not everything is going to be in perfect order in any reality. But understanding what is really critical, so you can prioritize, your initiatives based on that as well.
Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been wonderful. Hopefully we gave our audience some ideas to ponder, some practical applications to bring into their daily lives, and any questions that anybody has that we can actually pose any member of our panel. Please send us emails and call us. We'd be more than happy to address them. And Mike, thank you so much for your time. You've been wonderful, and for your ideas and contribution.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.